What's going on here? I'm trying to pin myself. There I am.
Hi, Karen.
Hey, guys.
Hey,
So let's see who's coming in over here. We've got some people on YouTube and Facebook, I hope. I have this new version of Restream, and I can't tell how many people are ever watching anymore.
Oh,
So I feel pretty incompetent. Let me get
you
it
do
back
much
up.
better than I even think about doing. This is all so badly Greek for me, Karen. Really.
Oh, well, I see I have some messages. So if you're here on Facebook or YouTube, let me know you're here. Say hi. Let me find, where's the chat? There's the chat. I keep losing my chat window. I have new monitors and I'm just relearning to arrange everything to my satisfaction. There we go. Now I see everyone. So hi, everybody. It's good to see you. I'll wait a couple minutes. Oh, we have a bunch of people in the Zoom room. Okay, let's let everybody in. Gonna have a great time tonight. I have a wild story for tonight. I'm either gonna really endear myself to all the cult-perspiring people, or I'm gonna get them all really angry at me.
Aw.
So we'll see what happens by the end of the presentation. I also have some fun stuff here too that I'm going to talk about. Hi. Oh, yes, more. Oh, I am so glad that Mr. Talmadge is here from Setauket tonight, because I am very interested in seeing what he's going to think about my speculation on the identity of 355. So hi from the Hudson Valley, everybody's here. Well, I want to say hello to everybody. As you can see, I am not at home in Hanover Square tonight. I am instead at my sister, Mrs. Van R's house, and this is her own little private French parlor. Very nice, isn't it? So very nice little private French parlor for the ladies. And I have to say that this is only for the ladies, that Mrs. Van R does not let the gentlemen come in. And she believes that it's always important to have a place where just the ladies can relax without the company of the gentlemen. But I have to say that yesterday, we've been up all week with my sister. We've been working on some projects together. And yesterday we were in here lounging around in our bed gowns, and in traipse Mr. Van R and Mr. Q in their boots, snow and everything. And Mrs. Van R leaped up and kicked them both out. Mr. Van R protesting the entire time and saying, I paid for it. I ought to be able to see it once in a while. And Mrs. Van R responding with great frustration that she thought the whole problem with men's incivility was settled centuries ago with Catherine of Eleanor of Aquitaine's court. So there was quite a moment there, Mr. Q looking rather amused, like he didn't know what to do with himself, but all worked out well and was settled. And we ladies went back to lounging here in the parlor. Now I am dressed this evening because although we do lounge around a lot during the day, Mrs. Van R does insist on being dressed for dinner. So we are dressed for dinner tonight. So here I am. Now, I wanted to show you, I said that I was here because I'm visiting Mrs. Van R to work on some projects. And as you know, it's getting to be the end of winter, which means all the ladies are going to be looking to come into the shop for fabrics and items for their spring fashions. So we have been together examining the latest French fashions to see what types of things I ought to have in the store. And this is one of the fashion plates from France we were looking at. And we had a bit of fun with this, with my sister declaring that did indeed look like young Alexander Hamilton. But to our knowledge, Mr. Hamilton has never been in Paris, so it likely isn't him, but does bear quite a resemblance to him in a number of ways. And of course, we mean no offense to Mrs. Hamilton, but Mrs. Hamilton, we hear, does have a very good sense of humor about her husband's attraction to fair ladies with blonde hair. So having quite a laugh about it. But the reason I wanted to show you this is notice the jacket on the table, on the chair, and my jacket tonight. I love the red and white stripe. I think it's incredibly fashionable and becoming. So I am wearing the red and white stripe, and I meant to have it out to show it to you and I forgot it, but I did just acquire 3 yards of lovely Dupioni silk with which to make the nice little the skirt here, the petticoat here. So I'll be making the silk petticoat, and you may just see me wearing this in the spring at a special event. And I think I'll be adding some silk trim to this jacket as well. So Mrs. Van R and I have been discussing ways I can improve the jacket and clothes I can make to show off the fabrics to the ladies. Mrs. Van R, you might remember, in her youth was a very sought after, you would call her dressmaker, an our time mantua maker, and has a flawless taste when it comes to the matching of fabrics and patterns. So I always defer to my sister when it comes to things. She, of course, no longer sews on her own, only sews for her own enjoyment, and some things for me that I work on as well. So this is what we ladies have been working on all week, has been getting fashion together and preparing for spring shoppers in my store and making sure that I myself am wearing the finest of French fashion so that they'll see how beautiful the fabrics look and be more inclined to buy them. Let me look at some of your let me see. Oh, Mr. White tells me that in Mr. Ellis's new book, The Cause, he does a short profile of my friend Mercy Otis Warren. I will have to see that. A phenomenal lady, Mercy Otis Warren. Thank you for that. And everyone else. And read his book about, Ellis's book about Hamilton. No, Hamilton never went to Europe. That's why we were laughing over this picture, that although it does look a lot like him, that he never himself went to Europe, although it looks like he would have enjoyed himself quite a bit if he did. As we know, Dr. Franklin had a wonderful time in Europe. And Miss Kaler tells me, I look lovely tonight. Thank you very much. Thank you. Took quite a bit to put this together. For those of you in the 21st century who've been following my stays project, I am wearing them. And I can't get up to show them to you because I'm on a chair with 2 pillows on it and I won't be able to get back up on the chair. But let me tell you, my figure is exquisite in these new stays. I have lost 25 years. It is really stunning. I have a waist again. They are very comfortable. They look gorgeous. My jacket fits beautifully. And so I'm suggesting to you people in the future, you ladies in the future, that you might want to try a pair of authentic 18th century stays to get your lovely youthful figure back, because they do it without any pain. So I'm sitting here, they're very comfortable. So those of you who've been following that story, thank you for following that project. So let's start out with our story. Who was the lady known as 355? And oh, I got a message. Oh, Mrs. Healey said it would take more than stays. Certainly not. Certainly not. I think we could do it with a good pair of stays. And of course, a properly tailored dress that Mrs. Van R would be able to help you with, I'm sure. So you see here is a part of the code book from the Culper-Spiring code book kept by Colonel Benjamin Talmadge, showing the number 355. And it tells us that 355 was the code word for lady. Now, in your time, I think 355 has become pretty much a legend, and that she spied for George Washington and occupied New York City, and no one ever knew who she was. Her identity is still a secret in your time. There has been so much speculation over who this woman might have been. And so tonight I'm going to let you know why I don't think it's any of the women people think it is, and who I do think it is. Now, an important thing to keep in mind, and this was hinted to me by my friend, Colonel Talmadge, when I was trying to find out from him who 355 was. Of course, he would not tell me. He did point out to me something very interesting, and that is that there are 2 numbers in the code book. One that you see here is 355 for lady. The other, and let us hope I have these in the right order tonight. The other, I hope, yes, says 701 for woman. So there is a difference between a lady and a woman. I don't know if in your time those two words have so much of a difference, but in my time, they do. So, lady is a very particular type of woman, a woman considered to be a lady who comes from a good background, who has refined manners, who is out in society, who is well dressed. She may be a member of the aristocracy, she may not be, but she is accepted by society as a lady versus a woman who might be someone who works, who is a servant, or works in a tavern, or works at some other things we might not want to talk about, as maybe an actress, or a dancer or something like that would be a woman. But a lady is a very particular class of woman. So we know that whoever 355 was, she was a lady. So that's not just any woman. Now, some of the ladies I've heard who might be 355, well, I've heard some people suggest that it might have been Elizabeth Bergen. And Mrs. Bergen was indeed an incredible, great patriot, and that she rescued dozens of prisoners from New York, occupied New York, and safely brought them to New Jersey where they could escape. She did such service to General Washington that she was actually awarded with a pension by him. Now, just as they were about to catch her in New York, as her identity had been uncovered, she left New York and went to Philadelphia, where she lived afterwards. She was united with her children in New Jersey. They all lived in Philadelphia, and General Washington granted her a pension for the service that she provided him in helping soldiers escape from the prisons in New York. So although a lot of people think it might have been Elizabeth Bergen, there are some problems with that. And one of those problems is whoever Our Lady 355 was, she had to have access to the most secret spy intelligence on the other side. And that means Major John Andre, the spy master on the British side, because the information that 355 shared that was so vital was that one of General Washington's commanders was a traitor, that one of his commanders was corresponding with Major Andre about switching sides. And she knew this person only as Gustavus, his code name, which meant that whoever 355 was, she had access to Major Andre's most personal guarded papers. So this is not just anyone. This is someone that Major Andre would have accepted into his closest social circle. This also becomes a little bit difficult because Major Andre did not live in New York City during those years of occupation. He lived at the Beekman Manor, which in your time is around 68th Street and First Avenue, a few miles away from the city of New York. So this lady had to have been someone who would have been allowed to freely move out of the barricades of the city and up to Beekman Manor. Would have had to have been a lady who was often seen traveling through the country in a carriage. So it certainly was not Mrs. Bergen, who certainly would not have been as part of John Andre's inner circle. Mrs. Kaler is wondering, was it a servant? I don't think it could have been a servant because of the traveling back and forth between the city and Beekman Manor. I don't believe a servant would have been able to do that without being arousing suspicion. So I don't think it was a servant, although that is a possibility that it was a servant. The other thing is, how did this lady get her information to the Culper spy ring? She had to have been trusted by them. This means this had to be someone who had trust on both sides, someone that Major Andre and the officers in the British military trusted, and someone the Culper spy ring trusted. Now, that is very difficult to find. I have heard in your time that some people think this might have been Peggy Shippen Arnold, that it might have been Mrs. Arnold herself. Think about that. Why would Mrs. Arnold want her husband to be revealed as a traitor? Look at the life she lived when that very fact came to light, an exile in her own hometown and her own country. So I doubt very much it was Peggy Shippen Arnold who would have done this. Plus, how would she have got that information to the Culper ring? The Culper ring was a very closed system of operators. only a handful of them based in Colonel Talmadge's hometown, Setauket, Long Island, and consisting mostly of his friend Abraham Woodhull, who was very mistrusting of people, very cautious, and very skittish about this whole thing, known as Culper or Culper Sr., who sometimes made trips into New York City as a farmer to sell things that they would have needed in Occupy New York City. And sometimes his neighbor, Mrs. Anna Strong, would accompany him. Some people think 355 might have been Anna Strong. That works on the Culper side of the equation, but how would she have got that information from John Andre? As she was a little bit too old at that time to have been in John Andre's social circle, and probably not comfortable enough around English aristocracy. So that's another point I ought to make. This would be an American-born lady who was comfortable in British society. And you might know some of the manners were different. So this is someone who moved very elegantly in British-dominated aristocratic society. So it likely was not Anna Strong. Now, when Anna Strong and Benjamin and Abraham Woodhull stayed in New York City, they stayed in his sister's place, Underhill's boarding house. And I think Underhill's becomes an important part of this story. His sister, Mary Underhill, was married to, I forgot his first name, Underhill, and they had a boarding house in New York City, part of the Culper spy ring as well. Culper Jr., Robert Townsend, also for a time lived at Underhill's boarding house. So we know that that is a hot spot for the Culper spy ring. So our person may very well have had access to Underhill's and was trusted by them too. So if it wasn't Peggy Shippen, and I don't think it was Anna Strong, and I don't think it was Elizabeth Bergen, and it could have been a servant, but maybe not, who do I think was a likely candidate to have been 355? Well, who would meet all of those requirements but someone living in occupied New York in the aristocratic part of society who also would have been highly trusted in George Washington's inner circle? So let's go to our next picture and we'll start to investigate who that might have been. And oh, this is just another page from the code book I had for you, just showing another page of just people's names and the way they were translated in the code book, just so you could see a little bit more of it. So this is the next picture I have for you. And this is Major General Lord Stirling, William Alexander. Very important person in the Revolutionary War. William Alexander, his mother, Mary Sprott Prevost Alexander, a great mentor of mine. You've heard me speak about her before, a very successful and powerful lady merchant here in New York City who helped me as a young lady merchant learn to navigate the business world here in New York City. So his mother is a very strong lady. His father, James Alexander, was one of the lawyers who defended John Peter Zenger in the Free Press trial. And he himself had petitioned the British government to have his family name restored, as they were the descendants of the first Earl of Stirling and the rightful owners of Stirling in Scotland. And his petition was denied, although the Continental Congress granted to him the title Earl of Stirling or Lord Stirling. Throughout the Revolutionary War, he is known as Major General Lord Stirling. So if you're looking at Revolutionary War battles and you're wondering, you know, who is this Lord Stirling fighting for the Americans? Well, it's William Alexander. He was from New Jersey. And so William Alexander was very close to General Washington. They knew each other for a long time. And he also exposed the ring of officers who were looking to remove General Washington from command. So he was very trusted by General Washington and in Washington's inner circle. So next we have a picture of Mrs. Alexander, who I have mentioned before as my friend Sarah Livingston Alexander, or Lady Stirling, General Alexander's wife. And they had two daughters, Mary Alexander, named for her grandmother, and Catherine, or Kitty, named for another grandmother. And young Mary Alexander married a gentleman in New York named Robert Watts. Robert Watts' father, John Watts, was one of the wealthiest merchants in all of New York on the level of the Delancey family, and also a very strong loyalist, one of a group that the Sons of Liberty called the Odious Six, the six most hated loyalists in all of New York City. Young Mary Alexander married Robert Watts, John Watts' son, and they lived in New York. And when the war came about and everyone fled, they decided to stay in New York City as neutrals, favoring neither one side or the other. And incredibly, in 1778, the British commanders granted Lady Stirling and her younger daughter, Catherine, the right to visit Mrs. Watts in occupied New York City. Why in the world, you might ask yourself, would the British commanders invite the wife of one of Washington's most trusted inner circle into their occupied city to look around and leave with information? It seems to make no sense whatsoever. But when you speak to Lady Alexander or Lady Stirling about what happened, she has a very interesting story to tell. Now, as she told me, she said her time in New York was very challenging, and that first she had little time alone to speak candidly with her daughter, that there was always someone listening just a short distance away. So she had very little opportunity to speak directly with her daughter. But her younger daughter, Kitty, later said that her sister told her that all of the people who stayed in New York as neutrals were absolutely miserable and had come to despise the English, and that many loyalists were coming to despise the English and wish they could leave and get out of the city. They deeply regretted their choice in staying. Well, while Lady Stirling was in New York, the British, the mayor and the officers did everything they could to try to tarnish her image. They gave her gifts, which she returned. They even left expensive gifts in her inn room. They offered to pay the bill in her inn. And she realized that what they were trying to do was to make her look tarnished in a way that might drive a wedge between the two generals, General Washington and General Stirling. And she said the whole time she felt under pressure and had to be very careful not to accept any gifts or any favors while she was here, as she felt they would either be seen as a way the British could then get favors from her, or seen in a way that would tarnish her husband's image. So that went on during her whole time in New York. So after leaving New York, it was very interesting that she made these observations that they were trying to turn her to tarnish her husband, and that her daughter was miserable. Well, so if her daughter was miserable, look here. I like to change the background back again to my original background so you can see my sister's lovely little French parlor. So if young Mary Alexander Watts was indeed miserable and had come to hate the English so much, perhaps she is our young lady, as she would have had easy access to John Andre's inner circle. She was a Watts. She was a Watts. She would have been invited to all of the balls and parties, highly trusted enough to wander freely throughout the Beekman mansion when she was there. She's also quite young and beautiful, attractive, just the type of woman Major Andre liked to have in his inner circle. She, I believe, would have had access to Andre's papers. Now, on the culper side, who better for them to trust than the daughter of Lord Stirling? Of all people, the daughter of Lord Stirling. So it is my opinion that 355 may very well have been young Mary Alexander Watts, or a lady similar to her who was married into the New York aristocracy, stayed in occupied New York, but had some deep connection to Washington's inner circle, so deep that she would have been trusted. And of course, you know that eventually she realized that the codename Gustavus was Benedict Arnold, and sent that message on to George Washington. Unfortunately, it reached him just after Arnold's treachery had been exposed. So her great reveal was about a day late in helping General Washington. So that is my view of who 355 might have been, Mrs. Watts or Mary Alexander. And if Trinity Church Graveyard ever opens again to the public, I'll take a picture of her grave for you, because she's buried there with the full Watts and Alexander families. There's quite a lot of graves in one section of Trinity Church. She's buried near her father and her grandmother and her mother, and her sister, I think, maybe is buried there as well. Her sister married Mr. Dorr, a friend of Alexander Hamilton's, and her lineage through her sister has quite a number of more notable men and ladies than Mrs. Watts has. So I wonder what you think about my idea about Mrs. Watts being 355, someone I don't think has ever been suggested before. And honestly, I would have never suspected her had I not known of her mother's 1778 visit to occupied New York, and young Mrs. Watts being so disgusted and so full of anger at the Loyalists, or the British, for the way they were treating the Loyalists. Mrs. Healey thinks it's interesting, and I make a good case. Well, it is all speculation, of course, as to who it might have been. It certainly wasn't me, as I was not in New York. I was here at my sister's house, but not enjoying the French parlor, which is a new addition since the Revolutionary War. Mrs. Van R's French parlor, as I mentioned, where the gentlemen are only allowed by invitation. It's wonderful to sit in here in the afternoon, put up our feet, laugh about past experiences, drink some hot chocolate, and just enjoy ourselves as if we're young girls again, reminiscing about the past. And that is how the story of 355 came up, as we were reminiscing about the past, reminiscing about the war. And we started thinking about who could have been 355. And Mrs. Van R reminded me of Lady Sterling's visit to New York. And we thought, oh my goodness, 355 might have been Mary Alexander Watts. What better to pay back the odious Loyalists in New York City than to be spying on them while pretending to be one of them? So I'm going to look and see if we have any comments. No comments. I thought some of you might find this interesting, or maybe a bit outrageous, that it's not one of the people who for over 200 years has been suspected of having been 355. But we know it could not have been a common woman. Was a lady, or someone Colonel Talmadge considered to be a lady. How do I think she got access to his papers? Well, Major Andre threw many balls and parties at the Beekman Mansion, some of them large balls and parties, and people wandered freely through the mansion at that time. And I think it was a little bit easier for a lady to wander around and pretend to be lost. Oh, I didn't realize I was in Major Andre's private quarters. Oh, please forgive me. And it would have been much easier to play a wandering, lost in the mansion, or just looking around and admiring it and apologizing for the mistake and being forgiven. Also, remember, the British gentlemen thought that ladies had no brains. Ladies had no brains. Ladies stopped learning at 12 years old. So it would be very easy for a designing, intelligent lady to pretend she was naive, to simply pretend, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Oh, please don't tell anyone. I'll be so embarrassed. What will people think of me if they know? And perhaps a couple of tears of contrition. Oh, please don't tell anyone I was in Major Andre's private quarters. I'll be so embarrassed. I won't be able to show myself in public. A skilled lady, I think, would be able to pull that off quite well and trick all of the gentlemen. So that would be my idea for how she had access to his personal papers, as the men were quite careless, around the women. Let's see. Someone tells me on YouTube, Liberty Seeker tells me, amazing the courage people had in the day. Absolutely, because if they found her, no matter who she was, they would have thrown her in the prison for doing what she did. A gentleman would have been executed right there on the grounds of Beekman Manor, right there at the time. But since she was a lady, she would have found herself in the prison, likely in the Bridewell, with horrible conditions. So it was a very brave thing to do. Mr. Linden says someone on his Quora asked how British peers were, oh my God, they're going by so fast, you guys are so wonderful. Asked how British peers were treated with their titles after the war. Well, there were no titles after the war. So if you were British in America and you had a title, your title was gone if you were allowed to stay. Now, if you were a British peer in America and you aided the British in any way, either financially or with intelligence, or you commanded or served, you were gone. You could not stay. So I don't think we had any real British peers remaining after the Revolutionary War. Lord Stirling after the war. Well, Lord Stirling, I'm sorry to say, did not live to see the evacuation of the British from his wonderful city, New York. The British left in November of 1783. Lord Stirling left us in the spring of that year, but he surely would have given up his title after that, as Lady Stirling became Mrs. Alexander. So people did not keep their titles. Woodhull's connection to the lady. This is from Mr. Talmadge of Setauket. He says, Woodhull's connection to the lady. Talmadge was probably unaware as to who the lady was. It's more likely that only Abraham Woodhull knew who she was, hence the well-kept secret for centuries. Well, Colonel Talmadge, I'm sure that even if you know, you will not tell anyone, as it's well known that you still will not disclose whose hair was in Major Andre's locket when he went to his death. So I know, Colonel Talmadge, that you would never divulge anything as a gentleman. But thank you for your clarification. And we know that Mr. Woodhull would never divulge either. Let's see, Mr. Linden says, I mentioned that nobody seemed bothered by Lord Stirling, although he died before the, no one was bothered by Lord Stirling because, sir, it was a bit of a joke and a jab at the British peers. It was right after his case was denied by the House of Lords that the Continental Congress voted, I think unanimously, to grant him the title, the Earl of Stirling. The Continental Congress granted no titles of peerage, only that one, as an insult to the British Parliament. So that was the only time. So I think they did it more as a dig to the British than anything else. The British were sent back, right, not executed. Yes, we did not have that type of retribution against the British at the end of the war. The Treaty of Paris determined who could stay, who had to leave, and what the process was for the British departing America, and what the process was for loyalists to depart America. So it was all done in an orderly fashion. Although I have to say, as Mr. Hamilton has told me, not to forget that there was a great deal of private retribution that went on that was uncontrollable, although Washington tried his best to control that sort of thing. You know, there were lots of country lands, woodlands, farmlands, where various types of retribution did take place. People were stripped of their property, their homes, everything. People were beaten or things were stolen from them. And there was personal retribution. Think, as I was speaking to Mr. Hamilton earlier this week, of course, Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Madison and I are preparing for our April event. And Mr. Madison sought to remind us that during the war, Americans suffered greatly, that we did not know who we could speak to. Even in our own homes, sometimes we didn't know who might have been spying for the other side or willing to give us up to get favor from the other side. So in the case of Mrs. Van R and I, we spoke only when we were alone here in the prior parlor, which was not as elegant as this one. Thank you, Mr. Van R, for your generosity. But even we were very careful about who we spoke in front of. So there was that. Our daughters were attacked by soldiers. Ladies were attacked. Women were attacked in ways I would not like to go into here. Property was burned. People were hanged. People were beaten. People were shot. It was an absolute horrible time, as Mr. Hamilton reiterated to Mr. Madison and me a few days ago when we were speaking, that we should not forget the horrors of the war. So, of course, many people, felt a pent-up anger toward people who supported the British and took out that anger on them in various ways. So although we tried not to have too much retribution, it was impossible to prevent any of it. It was very sad. War is always a terrible thing, not to be entered into lightly and not to be recommended toward anyone. And I think in your time, you've been blessed without having to live through war, haven't you? War in America, that you've been blessed with not experiencing that. Oh, Mrs. Ciccione says to me, so intriguing. Sometimes the people you least expect do the most incredible things. That is very true. And there are many of those stories during the Revolutionary War. And so I think that Mary Watts might have been one of those stories. But certainly Abraham Woodhull himself is one of those stories, isn't he? A farmer from Long Island who, was not before that considered to be exceptional or courageous in any way, but full of so much hatred for the British over what they were doing while they were occupying his hometown, that he stepped up and he did this, at great risk to himself and to his family, to his friends, great risk. So even Abraham Woodhull himself, who would have thought, that someone like him would have turned out to be so key in our victory. So we find these stories everywhere. Let's see, any more else? I think that's it for tonight. I hope you enjoyed my little presentation. And I think that's good. So thank you very much for joining me with my speculation on who 355 might have been. I am going to be working on a more formal video about this that will be out in a week or so, with a lot more documentation as to why I think it was Mary Watts. Mrs. Kaler says, it makes you wonder how many more stories like Mr. Woodhull stories out there. We do not know. We do not know. And that is why when we think back to the time of the war, we always want to consider all of the people who served in ways that we never knew. So we want to keep those brave people in mind too, who did things we never knew about. Am I going to see the 355 movie? When it comes out on live stream, I'll see the 355 movie. Yes, I will. Have any of you seen the 355 movie? For those of you who don't know, there's a new spy movie out called the 355. In the opening sequence, they do a little tribute to the spy known as 355. And I think it's about a group of international lady spies. It has an actress in it. I adore Jessica Chastain. I adore all of her work. I've seen everything she's done. I think she's magnificent. So she is my motivation for wanting to see the movie when it comes out. I think she's wonderful. I don't say that lightly for many actresses, but I think she is wonderful. If you saw the movie she did about the poker games, I forgot the name of it. Someone's Game, where she played. It's based on a true story of a young lady who ran two of the most highly priced poker games in America and what happened to her. It's a wonderful, wonderful movie. Who's streaming it? Where did I see it? I might have seen it on Epix, but you can look up her films and find the name of it. Molly's Game. It's called Molly's Game. It's wonderful. Have I watched, from Mr. Linden, Lucy Worsley's show, American History's Biggest Fibs? It is worth seeing. No, I have not. And other people have suggested it to me. So Molly's Game. Yes. So I will check that out, Mr. Linden. Thank you. There are a lot of big fibs just about the American Revolution, aren't there? I think I've talked about some of those myself, some big fibs. One big fib was that Aaron Burr was convicted of treason, which he was not. And today is the anniversary of the day, I think, that Vice President Burr was arrested and charged with treason, although he was never found guilty of treason. Therefore, he didn't commit treason, right? That's the rule of law that we have. So I can be just as I say, tricky as a gentleman in the way I view things if I choose. So on behalf of Mrs. Van R., who's sitting across from me with her feet up, waving to me that it's time for us to go off for supper and that we are all dressed and it is time to eat, I will say goodbye for the evening. And I will see you next week with another interesting topic about the Revolutionary War. So thank you all for joining me, and I'll see everyone again next week. Thank you for coming tonight.